Welcome to the Open Forum in the Villages, Florida podcast. In this show, we talk to leaders in the community, leaders of clubs, and interesting folks who live here in the Villages, to give perspectives of what is happening here in the Villages, Florida. We hope to add a new episode most Fridays at 9 a.m. We are a listener-supported podcast. There will be shout-outs for supporters in episodes. As a supporter, you will get a direct email link to Mike. In Season 5, we are making significant improvements and changes on an ongoing basis.
Now you can help me afford to keep making this podcast by becoming a supporter. First, a quick note about the podcast. It's available because I absolutely love doing it, despite the fact that it costs me probably more time than I can actually afford. Now, I can't buy back my time, but there is one thing that you can do that would be really helpful. And that is help me to afford making this podcast. You can do that by going to the website, openforuminthevillages.com, and clicking on the supporter box and making a small donation of $3 to $10 a month, and you can cancel at any time. Really, a small donation of $3 will still make a difference, and I'd really appreciate it more.
If you have a book that you would like to turn into an audiobook, let us know via email to mike@rothvoice.com. Hope you enjoy today's show.
This is Mike Roth on Open Forum in the Villages. Today, I'm joined by Nicole Christina, a psychotherapist with more than 30 years specializing in eating disorders in midlife and elder women. She's also the host of Zestful Aging, a multi-award-winning podcast that considers the many issues accompanying aging. She strives to bring optimism to aging and interviews guests from all over the world, and those people are thriving in later life. Nicole is also the author of the book, Not Just Chatting, How to Become a Master Podcast Interviewer. Thanks for joining me today. Nicole, why in later life are people possibly going to develop eating disorders?
More. And if we think about where eating disorders thrive, they thrive in places where people are having massive transition and uncertainty in their lives. And if we think about adolescence, that is a place that certainly we see eating disorders. But then when we jump to later life, when we might be experiencing all kinds of changes, retirement, empty nest, maybe we're moving to Florida, all kinds of, maybe our partners are frail, maybe we're taking care of our parents. There's a lot of massive transition and adjustment, and it can create a bit of a tailspin. And the thing about eating disorders or disordered eating, which is sort of the lesser version, is that it helps us contain our anxiety and it makes our life very manageable. So here's an example. Instead of thinking about my mom who may be experiencing some cognitive decline, I'm focusing on how many carbs I'm not eating or how many hours at the gym I'm spending, or I might be weighing my food, or I might be fixated on getting particular, supposedly clean ingredients. So it's a way of sort of distilling our lives that can be a wonderful distraction to some of the complications that happen as we age.
Particular names to the eating disorders that you see prevalent in elder adults?
Eating disorders, and some of them, it's all the different sides of the same coin. So it's using food and or exercise in a way to really focus. So some people might restrict calories, and that would lean more in the anorexic range. Some people may binge, which means eating more than 2,000 calories at a given time and feeling quite out of control, and then maybe compensating in different ways like vomiting or over-exercising or taking laxatives. So it's a wide spectrum of ways to have an unhealthy relationship with food and our bodies. But that's a good question. I don't know if there are particular ways that older people might fall prey to this. I do know that there's this idea of being healthy, right? And that when you're in Florida and people are not wearing that many clothes, in upstate New York, we're always wearing sweatpants and sweatshirts. But if you're down in Florida playing pickleball, there's more of you exposed, right? And so...
Oh, yeah, we're getting more vitamin D here.
For sure. So, my thought would be that people would say, I'm not going to eat this, I'm going to skip this, I'm going to not eat any fat or not eat any carbs, with the idea that their bodies are quite open for assessment from their peers. And I know that it kind of can, how shall I say, it can be disguised as I'm eating healthy. And when I do an evaluation on someone and I ask them about eating and I say, tell me about eating, and they say I eat very healthy, I know now to ask the follow-up questions, which is, what does that mean? And when they say I don't eat any fat, or I only eat 1,200 calories, then I know there's more to learn.
We do a lot of work with the prevention of Alzheimer's, and one of our major supporters is Dr. Craig Curtis, and he's talked a lot about the mind diet. Have you heard of that?
I haven't. I mean, I'm very familiar with a lot of the different, preventing cognitive decline, but tell me more about the mind diet.
I'm going to attempt to remember the way he described it as a diet, which is based on the Mediterranean diet, but is, a little bit stricter in that you can only eat meat once a month, and most of your protein is going to come in from fish or plant-based materials.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy about that, and the thing that's so interesting, and I might get in trouble for saying this, is that eating is important, but not as important as sleeping well. And we all want to avoid cognitive decline. And it seems very tempting to say, if I don't eat meat, we all want to do whatever we can. And unfortunately, it becomes kind of a matter that could be an over-controlled, right? It's like, oh, I can't go to a birthday party because I can't eat sugar, so I'm not going to have cake. And so then the question becomes, what's the trade-off here? Are you not doing social things because they're going to have a cake or stuff that isn't on, what we call quote-unquote healthy diet? And we can get into trouble restricting and being really rigid. I am one who, I don't eat processed food. I mean, that is I just don't do it because we know that's just crap for you in many ways. And I think that if people are looking for good guidelines, they might, I had a guest on and I loved how she distilled it. She said, don't eat processed foods, decrease sugar, and take a walk. And I thought, now that's a guideline that makes sense, that can, be really helpful. What happens is if we get too stringent on some of these kinds of diets, then we are like, oh my gosh, I ate a hamburger, and we worry and stress and obsess about the fact that I just had a hamburger and white flour, which turns out to be worse than the actual hamburger. So we don't want to get into a situation where we're so fixated on being healthy, there's actually a name for that it backfires. And that's my concern.
Yeah, I did a show with a pathologist, a retired, and he compared sugar to a narcotic drug where it's addictive. And we actually did an experiment inside the show where he brought us a solution, a herb that we put on our tongues, and then we couldn't taste the sugar in candy. We only could taste the flavor. It was a very interesting experiment. And one of the things that he convinced me to do in the show was to eat whole grain barley as a health food, and, have to buy it from Amazon. You can't find it in your local supermarket. And I really think it's helping.
What is it helping?
Just, I feel physically better. Okay.
And is that something that's related to sugar absorption or just general good health?
Oh, it's the avoiding of sugar.
Yes.
You can't avoid it completely. But if you avoid eating that extra slice of chocolate cake,
yes,
which I love, I find that it makes it a lot better okay?
Yes.
And the other side of what you were talking about is sleep, because Dr. Curtis does talk about sleep, and we will be putting a 30-second spot in here for Dr. Curtis. How many hours of sleep do you, as a psychotherapist?
I know that sleep gets more difficult as we age, and there's a whole body of research out there, so I don't want to overstep what my expertise is, but it's not a luxury, and we should do whatever we can to sleep well. The things that I know are to keep a cool room, and even in upstate New York, I'll crack the window unless it's way below zero, and it to be very, very dark. Those are the things that I'm familiar with, but there are people who are experts. There's a woman I had on my show, and her podcast is Sleep is a Skill. And when we're not sleeping, I do know we're not cleaning out the garbage in our brain, and people, that's a risk for Alzheimer's. But that's about all I can say on that.
We're going to take a break now and listen to Dr. Craig Curtis. Dr. Curtis, what is one thing that people can do to help their brain?
One of the best things they can do comes down to the choices every day. Getting lots of sleep, for example. Getting the proper amount of sleep, for example.
And what does that mean? How many hours?
7 to 9 hours of sleep per day is what's currently recommended.
Good. Thank you.
With over 20 years of experience studying brain health, Dr. Curtis's goal is to educate the Villages community on how to live a longer, healthier life. To learn more, visit his website, craigcurtismd.com, or call 352-500-5252 to attend a free seminar.
I'm much more in the know about eating disorders, disordered eating, and people who, nobody wakes up and says, I want to have an eating disorder. I want to just think about food all day long, how much I've worked out, how much I haven't worked out, what I ate, what I should eat, what I don't eat, what I want to eat. That is not a fun life. I mean, it really clouds our minds and it takes the joy out. So if you think about maybe some of your guests going to a birthday party, let's say for their grandchild, and it's hard for them to enjoy the festivities because they're thinking, oh my gosh, there's sugar in that cake, there's white flour in that cake. Well, no one's asking you to have, 6 pieces, but having a moderate slice or a reasonable slice, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the day in, day out, sugary drinks, processed food. That's what's going to get you into big trouble. So these are more general guidelines, and what I see in my practice are people like my office is right near Syracuse University. I have really talented faculty, talented students, and they come and they say, I can't focus because I had a donut today. And that was 6 hours ago, and that's all that they can think about. That is really robs us of our joy and our vitality.
Yeah, I understand that. Let me switch back to the exercise and get your opinion of this. What Dr. Curtis said is to avoid Alzheimer's, one needs to do 25 minutes per week of moderate exercise, which will cause your brain to grow and therefore help mitigate the effects of amyloids in your brain. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm not a pathologist. I do know that exercise is, if there's a magic bullet, that's it. I'm a long distance walker. I have a lot of rescue dogs, and I live in upstate New York where we have lots of trails. And so that's part of my life. And you have to do some weight-bearing exercise, particularly for women who have osteoporosis or are at risk of osteoporosis. So movement is key. If you don't move it, you lose it. One thing I want to make a plug on, and this is going to sound kind of weird because I think it's a little kind of esoteric, but I love the rebounder, which is a mini trampoline. And it is wholly endorsed by NASA because they use it with their astronauts. And I know that's kind of a local group for you. For people who are not terribly stable, you can get a stabilizer bar. So the thing that's so lovely about this is it's a mini trampoline, and every muscle gets exercised because it's a gravity thing. You jump up, there's no gravity, and then you come down and there's lots of gravity. And so your whole body is getting a workout. And if you look on the benefits, if you do a little Google search, the benefits of rebounding, it's astonishing.
Now, what was the name of the product again?
It's a rebounder. I have a particular kind. You don't want to get a cheapie, because what you don't want is to, fall and have it break.
Mm-hmm.
It's really good for lymphedema, for women who have had breast cancer and mastectomies. What happens is a lot of scar tissue builds up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the lymph has no place to go, and that's your garbage truck. That's the system of cleaning out the garbage. So people I know don't want to look puffy. So when you're jumping on a rebounder, it really clears that inflammation. I have something called a NEEDAK, NEEDAK, which is sort of like the standard good quality one, kind of like the Honda Accord, if you will.
And
you can
give our listeners an idea. What's the diameter of this rebounder?
Ooh, boy, diameter.
2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet?
More, yeah, I'm going to say 3.5 feet.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that's lovely about it is I don't use a stabilizer bar, because I've been doing this for 20 years, but you can get a bar, so you're holding on to something and you're gently jumping. And the thing that is so crazy about it is you literally can't be in a bad mood when you get off, because it's this sort of rather childlike exercise, right? You're jumping, and I put music on, and it's like you're having your own little dance party.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this oxygenates our system, which of course affects our brain. And when we get off, I recommended this for people who have low-grade depression. It really is helpful in making you feel like energized. To me, it's the closest thing to a magic, system. And then I combine it with some light weights. Now, the thing I found is there's tons of videos on YouTube for over 50 or over 60 using a rebounder. It's very gentle on our joints. So we're not pounding, if people are still running or even walking. It's a trampoline. So your knees are super happy, and they're not feeling like they're being smashed down on asphalt.
Mm-hmm. Is this something people could buy on Amazon?
I'm sure they can. Again, I would really recommend you get one that is a good quality. And by good quality, we're talking about like not under $200. I would check out, I don't have any financial stake, but there's a thing called NEEDAK, which is very well regarded, NEEDAK. And once you go into Google, you'll fall into a deep rabbit hole of the best. I mean, there's a Swiss one, I think, but they're over $500 if that's something you want. But you just don't want to go to Target and get one for $50, because it's noisy, it doesn't last that long, and you don't want to mess around with potentially hurting yourself.
Yeah, I've had some bad experience with buying cheap exercise equipment where I actually fell. And
that's exactly what we want to avoid.
Right. So what should you do if you suspect one of your loved ones has an eating disorder?
Mm-hmm. That's a biggie. So here's the thing. People get into eating disorders because it's helping them in some way. I know that sounds sort of paradoxical. It's like, how could that be helpful? But it really does provide a bit of a, how shall I say, like a safety net to dealing with things like, I don't want to think about illness. I don't want to think about my mortality. Let me focus on organic kale, So to confront someone head on is probably not going to go well, because it's a coping strategy, and there's a reason they need it, right? So you're not going to just go and say, hey, I noticed that you don't eat, or when we go out to lunch, you never get dressing on your salad, or you never I noticed that you leave half your plate, or you're only drinking, I've never seen you eat, or you didn't have birthday cake at your grandson's, or this kind of thing doesn't really go well. But what you might do is say, hey, I'm just noticing in a really neutral and kind way, like, is everything okay? You see, I've noticed that, you're not ordering when we go out. So you're not going to say, I think you may have an eating disorder, because that is not going to go well. But I think just in a gentle way, say, how's things going? What's happening? I noticed we used to go out and split a pastrami sandwich, and now you're taking all the bread off and you're eating, what's
Right.
going on?
Right.
To be really gentle.
When I was in business, I had some client like that just unbelievably light eaters, and I thought they were anorexic looking. Never mentioned it. I wanted to keep them as clients.
Well, my grandmother, up to the day she died, I'd bring her deli, and she wouldn't eat the rye bread. And I'm like, this woman has been through, the Holocaust and everything, and she doesn't want to eat rye bread. Something's wrong here, to her dying day. So there are books. One that I really like is When Your Loved One Has an Eating Disorder. You can get that on Amazon. It's not a new book, but I really like it. And the other thing you can do is go online. There's an association that might be helpful called NEDA, NEDA, which is the National Eating Disorder Association. So, there are places, there are resources. Don't expect to be a hero. People do not like to be, shall I say, confronted with this.
Rescued, right.
So we see this really...
Be someone's choice. Nicole, what are some of the best resources that you can go to in your particular area if you suspect that your loved one is suffering from an eating disorder?
Well, the national one would be NEDA, which is the National Eating Disorder Association. I'm in upstate New York, you're in Florida, so we would have different state associations. I would start there, and don't expect it to be terribly pleasant. We see this in families all the time when, if we have a young adult or even an adult in their 30s and the parents want to talk about their concerns, it can be very divisive and pretty not fun. So, like, for example, if you have a grandchild who you think might be getting into trouble, I would maybe talk to the parent and just do some gentle inquiry, like, hey, we were going to go out for ice cream, but you're not, you're saying you don't want to do that because you don't want to get fat. Tell me about that. What are your concerns? What are your worries? And to see if you can, be a support for that person and just gently try to understand what's behind their, refusal to eat, something that we might consider like a luxury food.
Right. Well, here in the villages, one of the local jokes is that the men and the women always look like they're pregnant.
And that's because
people are overeating, in my opinion, or B, there are a lot of cases of diabetes. And when the diabetes sets in, they grow heavier. And that's a terrible disease.
Yeah. And this is maybe for a conversation for another day, but our food system is so broken. And even if you really try to eat well, the soil's depleted, right? So even if you have the resources and and you're buying organic veggies and organic meats and all this stuff, we live in a place where you can't even pump gas, and they're yelling at you about buying Oreos on the little LED
screen. Yeah,
exactly. You cannot, literally, you can't get away from it. And you had that great example about your guest coming on and how sugar is so pervasive. It is addictive. We're evolved to like things that are high sugar because back in the day, that's what berries were ripe. Those were safe to eat. So it's very difficult to live in a world. So we're really wired to want sweet, and the more sweet we eat, the more we want, and it is really tough. I mean, Everything, the people who make these snack foods, the way they know how to put the ingredients together is they put people in scans and they watch their brains and they give them sugar, and there's a bliss point. So your brain's like, yay, I love this. More sugar than is not what your brain wants. They find the exact right formula. And if you notice, I think we're about the same age, Mike. Back in the day, we used to eat ice cream, and it was like, do you want, like at Howard Johnson's, vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like ripple nut with moose tracks and chips with pretzel pieces, because those layers to our taste buds, and it introduces this novelty where we want to eat more. So we're really, we're up against it, and it's really tough to avoid the pressures that are all around us to eat things that are addicting.
Right. And the sugars, I personally believe, are directly behind the cases of diabetes. I see a lot of that here in the villages.
Oh, and cancer and heart. It's a very deep rabbit hole, but it used to be fat, and fat was demonized, and come to find out it really isn't fat, it's sugar. And that's tough. And there's all these politics about, who runs the lobby, for fat and dairy and the cows and the ranchers.
Right, so
and
they've
the
attacked
sugar.
They've attacked our cholesterol intake, putting a great many older adults on statin drugs, which have unintended side effects.
Yes.
But in fact, the cholesterol may not be all bad.
That's right.
So
that's right. So that's why I love going back. It sounds like you have people who are experts who are giving this great advice, but if it becomes too restrictive and complicated, I would just say stay away from refined foods. Decrease your sugar, and if you can, take a walk. And if you can't take a walk, consider getting a rebounder.
Okay, well, I like that rebounder idea, and I like the walk. And the thing that Dr. Curtis made very clear is that it should be a moderate-paced walk, not a slow stroll, because that will really help your body get back into shape or change your odds.
But a slow stroll is better than nothing, and the problem is that most Americans do nothing. So I always get a little worried when we say, hey, it better be moderate. Well, moderate's great, but slow is better than nothing. And if all you can do is go slow and you're with your people, that is adding years to your life for sure, because you're getting the circulation and all this. So yes, if you can do it. But if you have arthritis or you've had hip replacement or all of these things, just keep moving.
Great. Thanks a lot for being with us today, Nicole.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Mike.
Remember, our next episode will be released next Friday at 9 a.m. Should you want to become a major supporter of the show or have questions, please contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. This is a shout-out for supporters Tweet Coleman, Ed Williams, and major supporter Dr. Craig Curtis at K2 in the Villages. If you know someone who should be on the show, contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. We thank everyone for listening to the show. The content of the show is copyrighted by Roth Voice 2024, all rights reserved.